Hello and welcome everybody to the TESOL International Conference and to this session by Julia Christmas entitled Prosody Interventions 101 in the online or offline speaking fluency classroom. I'm very happy now to hand over to our presenter, Julia.
Thank you so much, Garth. I appreciate it. I will share my screen and get started. Thank you all for coming. I'm really grateful to actually have someone in our session. And I have a lot of ideas to share, and just one second and I will get things going so that I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so we are going to be talking about prosody, and we're starting at a really basic level, but trying to cover as much information as possible in a very short time. And the bulk of this, it's a workshop in terms of me explaining and showing and telling, and then at the toward the end, about the last 15 minutes, I will try to give you time to look through some of the interventions. I call them interventions. They're classroom practices that I use and have been using for many years to so you can get a little bit of hands-on time and some question and answer time. So just a teeny bit about me. I am based in Japan at the University of Niigata Prefecture. I have used these materials and other similar materials for a long time and use them with ages high school through adult. The CEFR levels are typically, my students range from A to B2. But I have used these with adults, higher level adults in C levels, who were really working on their presentations, trying to get professional presentations to sound more professional. So a little bit about pronunciation and prosody. The research has shown that previously it has really been the Cinderella of language teaching. It has been called the unattended bedfellow of fluency. I think that that's a truth, but there's also one of the triggers for this workshop, and the paper that goes with it, is that there's actually so much now. There's so much research, and it's a very, very robust field right now. It's there's so much research going on about it that I think it becomes overwhelming for teachers who have not used or have not begun to focus on prosody in their classroom. And I really wanted to put it into a digestible format, and so I'm trying to do that today. So a little bit about what we will do, talk about the definitions of what is prosody and why should we teach it, some barriers, and then really getting into how, along with the definitions for teachers, but how to integrate it into your fluency classroom or any classroom that has a speaking focus. I'm going to give you a framework for teaching that's based on Morley, and I really hope that it helps, and then some hands-on time, as I mentioned. So we're going to be looking at suprasegmental phonology, and it's the intonation patterns, the stress placement, the rhythm in spoken language, and that's prosody. And it is beyond the syllable level, and that's really, really important. And I'm sorry if I'm already, preaching to you things that you already know, but that's the difficulty of these types of workshops, is you really don't know. You can have people who are experts and people who have never been introduced to the topic at all, so bear with me. So I'm looking at suprasegmentals, and there's a reason for this. Segments are the word level, the vowel and consonant or syllable stress, like desert and dessert, and they're really important, and they're often easier for teachers to give a focus on because there are rules, and it's concise and easy to teach, and easy for students to digest. But suprasegmentals are far more important in some ways. So, and I'll explain why. The purpose for students is to raise the awareness. So these interventions are raising the awareness of these prosodic features, which are the tendencies of the English language and give them metacognition of their own speech tendencies and differences. My students are pretty much L1 speakers of Japanese, and Japanese is very different from the intonation of Japanese is very different, and there's interference. So I'm trying to give them metacognition about their own, the language, their own speech, and then allow them to monitor themselves and make them more independent so that when they leave my classes, they have the strength and ability to use these features when they speak and when they present. And these features really improve comprehensibility, extremely helpful. A lot of my students come to me saying that they want to be native-like, and I really, really use this idea of prosody to help them say, no, that is not a goal. That is not something that you want to do. You want to be English speaker-like. You want to be intelligible and comprehensible. Someone who knows and who can produce the tendency of spoken English and be as intelligible as possible. And they get that. They feel like, okay, that is a goal. That is something that I could actually reach. I think they feel often the impossibility. There's a fallacy of it, but they also feel like that's an impossible goal. So I give them a goal that is possible. Research has shown that across your whole school, that regardless of the major or whatever, if language is not adequately learned, if you're focusing on English, your communication has a very strong chance that it will fail. And on the word level, yes, of course, but also on the suprasegmental level, it will fail if you don't have the proper rhythm and the proper intonation. People will not understand you. And here's an example of this. John, said the boss, is lazy. And this is really different from this sentence. John said, the boss is lazy. And the only difference between those two sentences is the intonation. I'll focus more on that in just a second. There are a lot of obstacles to the direct instruction of prosody. The instructor mindset that it needs to be done by people who are only foreigners, people from other countries, the native speaker fallacy. In my experience, one of the greatest, the literature points to this, but also in my experience, one of the greatest problems is just the lack of experience. When in a previous university I was working at, we were trying to develop a blanketing fluency program that all students would have opportunities. All the students in our program would have the opportunity to have a focus on prosody in their fluency classes, in their English instruction. And when we were getting teachers together to develop this and do this, my colleagues just said, it wasn't, I don't know what it is. I don't know what you're asking me to do. I don't know how to do it. And so this can be a huge barrier, and thus one of the reasons why this workshop and previous versions of it were developed. There's of course the higher stakes and testing, and people believe sometimes that, well, any kind of direct instruction in some ways is going to interfere with the communicativeness of my teaching, and that is not necessarily true. So I want to show some ways that we can counter these obstacles, because without prosodic learning of the prosodic system, the intelligibility and listening comprehension does not advance. No matter how much effort you make on those individual sounds, it just doesn't get better. So priority needs to be given to rhythm and melody in whatever time you have. Just do it, even just a little bit. So I have some dedicated fluency classes. It's not completely pronunciation. They are speaking, reading, listening, and writing fluency oriented classes. And I do a lot of pronunciation in those because that's one of the things we do, speaking and listening. But in my other classes, I teach academic English and my students present, and I struggle to understand them. And they have presentations in a lot of other classes. We have EMI and CLIL classes at my university. And People really struggle to understand what their students are saying. And so I try to do the basics of teaching prosody in all of my classes that have any focus on speaking. So let's look, get some definitions for us and then for our learners. And you do not need to teach all of definitions to students. You need to know them. Teachers really should understand and feel comfortable with them, but the students don't need to memorize all of them. The bolded ones are the ones for the students, and I have a little chart. So for students, they need to know timing, the rhythm. They need to know the idea of stress and de-stress. They need to know thought groups. And I'll explain these in just a minute. They will be available in the PowerPoint later as well. They need to understand falling and rising. And linking is kind of cool. I don't always get to it, but they like it. My students really, really like. If you teach linking, they often have, my students often have a better chance to understand spoken English when they're dealing with listening, because people use linking and sometimes it's difficult to catch what people are saying unless you know that it's a thing that exists. For teachers, we need to know what suprasegmental phonology means, which is just prosody, and the prosodic features, intonation, stress, and rhythm. And you need to understand how intonation, how pitch, and the loudness and the tempo and the rhythm affect comprehensibility and affect the meaning of what we say. And I'm going to break these down for us methodically. So prosody. Prosody is the music of spoken English, the interconnected rhythm and melody. Prosodic features, and I'm going to talk this. I'll use this word constantly. The features are intonation, stress, and rhythm, and all the things that go with them. And they're the features that appear when we put sounds together in connected speech. And that's the key, is connected speech. When we connect and we try to make meaning, we use intonation, stress, and rhythm. Okay, what is intonation? It is a collective term that describes the pitch, the loudness, the tempo, and the rhythm. And it's about how we say things rather than what we say, although they are interconnected. Intonation is the way the pitch of the speaker's voice goes up or down as they speak, combined with a tempo and a rhythm of emphasis and non-emphasis. And that's bolded because English has a very distinct rhythm of emphasis and non-emphasis. And other languages don't necessarily have that. And that's where the interference comes from. Students may not be aware of this fact, this feature of English, and so they superimpose their own language and onto English, and it gets confusing. We use intonation to help get our message across, and that John said the boss is lazy, and versus John said the boss is lazy. And I think yes, I did. Okay. So this is an illustration of markings that show the difference between thought groups and falling or flat intonation. John, let's try this one time. I always do this. John said the boss is lazy. John said the boss is lazy. So what's happening there with the slash marks is I'm marking a thought group, falling intonation, and then after boss again. So I've got this thought group and falling intonation, thought group and falling intonation. But in the second iteration, John said, and you could argue that there's no thought group between John and said in the second iteration, but if there's a tiny pause or, and I'll explain in a minute, the red, the bolded, those are the stressed words, and we'll talk about stress and de-stress. And the black words are the structure words, and they are non-stressed. And technically you can have only one stressed word in a thought group. So, and because John is a name and it is stressed, I put a thought group slash there. So John said the boss is lazy, and there is a nice stop there. John said the boss is lazy. There's a tiny, tiny stop between John and said, technically. So I decided to put a thought group there. My students, I'll show how you get this, how you get your students to get this. But this is illustration of the marking that I will introduce to you in just a moment. So the final intonation, that's the slash, the following intonation comes after a thought group. It rises and sometimes it's flat if we know that there's more information coming. I don't always teach flat because my students kind of get a little overwhelmed if I try to teach too much. But with lots of examples and lots of listenings, more advanced students can really, really get the flat quite easily. The flat does not always, I would argue that it doesn't always interfere with comprehensibility as much as the others do. So I don't teach it as intensely. Prominence is just the highlighting of content and story words. So prominence highlights the important keywords, and teaching your students what words are highlighted is really important. But there's a way to do it that makes it easier. So I have good news and bad news, and that's content versus structure. And the rhythm is the alternation of weak and strong beats, strong and weak beats, the stress and de-stress, and all that is content versus structure. So if you teach those two words to your students, they kind of, if you have Cepher B students who have quite a bit of grammar under their belts, they get the idea of what grammar is. They know the thes and the us and the things that they cannot hear. So they can hear the content, they can hear the story, but they cannot hear the structure. So this example, I'm going to go back. They go to the lake at the end of the summer. And this is the first sentence. This is my pet sentence. They go to the lake at the end of the summer. I do that with dictation to introduce the idea of stress and de-stress. I have my students write that sentence. I say it 2 times. And the students always get go, lake, and summer in their first, and then I put them together and have them, okay, well, can you make the sentence? And they typically can, because they've caught enough through their listening and they have enough grammar, a foundation of grammar that they can create the sentence. But then I say, well, how did you create it? Could you hear me say all of those words? And they say, no, I could not hear it, but they could hear the go, the lake, the end, and the summer, the content, the story words. And then they use their grammar knowledge to build in the rest. And I said, well, that's what you got to do. That's how this works. And so they begin to see the connection between listening and story and content. And then they begin to later connect it with their own speech. So rhythm in words is the segmental part, but in phrases and sentences, the alternation of weak and strong beats, that's super segmental. And as mentioned before, the words with more meaning, the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives, adverbs, WH words, negatives, those are stressed. And the words that serve grammatical function, but they carry less meaning, the articles, prepositions, pronouns, they are weakened and reduced. So they go to the lake at the end of the summer. Go, lake, summer are the story words, and the rest is very, very weakened and reduced. And so the students cannot hear it, but they need to know that this exists. So there's less frustration. And it is content versus structure. Thought groups. So I teach stress and de-stress first, and then I go to thought groups. Because they need I really believe that students need the concept of stress and de-stress before they can do thought groups. So if you teach your students there is one stressed word in every thought group, okay, then what is a thought group? It's a way of grouping words so that they can be more easily processed. I really like, they're words that belong together. And that really, it's like the students can argue with each other. They don't belong together, that's separate. And we break the stream of speech into chunks, meaningful groups of words, collocations or discourse markers or hesitation device or grammatical constituents, and those are called thought groups. So I teach the idea of thought groups, and I have a specific mark for thought groups. Okay. Morley wrote about 3 levels of practice, and she wrote really well in a way that I could understand it. And I wanted to put it in a visual. So I made this. This is based on Morley's 3 levels of practice, because I needed to see it really quickly instead of going through the whole, like when I was doing any help with professional development for my colleagues, I needed to make it really easy to see. And so this came about. Level 1 is imitative. Level 2 is rehearsed. Level 3 is extemporaneous. And I use these 3 levels of practice and cycle through each feature when introducing each prosodic feature. And it moves from dependent, very dependent imitative practice to increasingly independent production. And I'll show you ideas. So in the imitative levels, I use for imitative practice, introduction of each feature and raising awareness of it, and lots of choral repetition, dictation, individual repetition of a model. And the model, it can be me or something from the internet, or other chunks of language that you can get recordings. And I use fixed and repeated dialogues. For the second, for level 2, it's rehearsed, but it's thoughtful and rehearsed practice. And so this is what I'm talking about when I like task-based learning, and you can make pronunciation into a task-based activity by using this thoughtful and rehearsed practice. And I will introduce it further in just a minute. But we're really working towards automatization and independent use. So you're helping them move from level 1 to level 3. Level 3 is, key points of the activities. I use dialogue, short paragraphs, and scripted PowerPoint presentations. So sometimes my students, I'm not a fan of scripted presentations, PowerPoints, but my students, because sometimes their EMI and CLIL classes are quite high level, they like to script them before they give their presentations. And so they have these scripts, and to make themselves more intelligible, they will bring the PowerPoint and the scripts into class and try to get help sometimes during my other classes, my Fluency class, to work on these presentations and make their, add the prosodic features to them. So it's a chance to do that. Extemporaneous is non-scripted. So examples are debates and discussion, and any non-scripted speech acts or presentations. So those are the 3 levels. Well, how do we get there? Okay, how do we get to level? The order of focus, I start with rhythm, weak beats and strong beats, and then move to stressed and unstressed, thought groups, and then falling and rising, and then linking if I have time. I have a list of specific classroom practices that I want to get into, and then I'll give you time to click on links and go through and then ask questions toward the end. Again, I use imitation and repetition, dictation, short dialogues with me as, so it's not shadowing exactly, but it's a repeat after me, choral practice. But I also have them do it individually with peer feedback. Peer feedback, the literature shows, and my students have shown me, that although sometimes they have not completely automatized it or cannot completely do it themselves, they can recognize it. So they can recognize, you didn't fall, you didn't rise. They can give each other peer feedback quite quickly once they understand the concepts, and they have enough, they've had enough input and practice with it. So I do I have them do peer feedback. I use short reading passages for practice with peer feedback. And I also do a lot of recordings for self and teacher feedback. There is a strong connection that's been shown throughout the literature that a focus on prosody helps build students' listening skills. And I use a lot of listening passages for homework. I use elo.org. I don't know if you're familiar with it. If you are, that's great. If you're not, it's an excellent resource. There are a lot of monologues, and the monologues have transcripts, and it's just gold. It's the easiest way to make an assignment. And I'll show you an example of one of those in just a moment. But the students have noticed that because of this focus, they have in kind of informal, Google form type of data collection on how the students feel that this has affected their listening skills. And a lot of students are saying, yes, being aware of these prosodic features and understand the idea of stress and de-stress, and it has made it easier for them to understand the content. This is what one of the things I've hoped for is to give power to my students. So those are the things that I do. This is how I introduce the very first step of prosodic features. This and the next slide. This is a really simple activity where you just say the numbers. Have the students say them first. 1, 2, 3, 4. A 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 1, and a 2, and a 3, and a 4. So you've got the original numbers, and then you have stress and de-stress with the rhythm and the tempo of English. And I don't do this often. Like, I don't do this. I only do it once because it's kind of, younger learners really like it as a kind of a chant, but I just do this to begin to raise the awareness. And then I do mice eat cheese, which is a very level 1 activity. So I write these phrases, sentences on the board, and so a kind of a teaching point tip. Have the students, you can have the students use their phones to record themselves saying these phrases before you teach timing. And then you have them record themselves again after the intervention, after you say it and give them an idea of how the timing of and de-stress works. And then they have these two for comparison, and they begin to realize and have some metacognition about their own speech patterns. So it's very simple. Mice eat cheese. The mice eat cheese. The mice eat the cheese. The mice are eating the cheese. The mice have eaten the cheese. Take a break. I want to take a break. I'm taking a break. She's taking a break. They've taken a break. On the YouTube link, you can go, and there's a very nice example of a woman a teacher using a metronome. And there's more examples of, she doesn't use mice eat cheese. That was in my grad program, and so I really like it. But she uses a lot of examples, and you can have the students watch it. But the idea of the stress and de-stress and the rhythm the students begin to see, oh, so we have these story words, these content words, and we have all these structure words, and the structure doesn't really affect the content as much. It's just stress and de-stress. So the timing doesn't really change, even though you have all those extra words in there, and it becomes like a tongue twister. But the students begin to realize, oh, there's a real rhythm going on here. So this is a very level 1 activity. So that was with timing, and I used dictation to introduce stress and de-stress. So along with that first iteration of they go to the lake at the end of the summer, for less advanced students, there's a big tree in the park. My desk is by the window. You can just do any kind of dictation that you normally do. But now you're going to look at the stress and de-stress of content. And then you ask your students, well, what are the most important words? What are the words that hold the story, that tell the story? And have them mark them. The students, like, very, very simple one. I like green tea. Or I like chocolate ice cream. All right, what is the story word? And the students choose green or chocolate because they know that, okay, it's not strawberry, or it's not iced tea. So emphasizing. And for more advanced students, I use longer sentences and things that I can use later to teach. Okay, well, what words do we stress and de-stress? So like, I like chocolate ice cream, but I don't like strawberry ice cream. And this sentence has, it has the nouns that are stressed, but it also has the negatives that are stressed. And students, if you have one sentence that you can mine for a lot of stress features, it's very, very useful. So that's a very, very level 1 activity. And well, now what do? I teach how to mark. I give the students symbols. I teach symbols and I use them consistently, absolutely, positively, consistently. So this is an example of, my classes are paperless. We were online for the last 2 years. And I needed a way that we could mark without using paper. And so I stress, and I'll explain super stress in just a minute. Thought groups are the slash, and falling is the other slash, rising is a plus, and links is an underbar. On paper, I have them do a small red dot for stress and a larger red dot for super stress. Super stress is not something that you will find in probably any literature anywhere, but my students decided that they needed to show, sometimes we really emphasize words, like I just did, really emphasize. It's much stronger than any of the other stressed words. And so they wanted to give it a name and a way to identify it so that they could mark up their own presentations or whatever. So we started calling it super stress, and I really, really like it. Students get it. Teaching thought groups, they already know I use the same sentences that I used. So when we're in level 1, I typically use all of the same sentences or all of the same materials to teach each feature, because you don't want to overload your students with new ideas and they are struggling to find the meaning of the sentence. You can, but I don't in the very, very beginning. So they go to the lake at the end of the summer. What are the thought groups? What are the words that belong together? And typically they can find them, and sometimes they argue about them, which is what I want them to do. So I set them as a task-based little project in class. Okay, I want you to mark, and then mark first individually, then work with a partner. And if you have any arguments, raise your hand and or put a question mark by them, and then raise your hand later when we have full class discussion. So, and I give them the answers. And it's really very, very easy, quick way to teach thought groups. I use dialogues to teach all the features. So do you like sweets? Yes, but not chocolate. What? You don't like chocolate? Really? No, really, I don't like it. So I'll do a dialogue, have them follow at level 1. And then when I know that they have the concepts, I give them a new dialogue and ask them to mark them. I ask them to, as it says, imitate, mark, check, say with a partner. But for level 2, I have them mark, check with a partner, and then say with a partner. So in level 2, there's not imitation. But we may do imitation later to a little bit when after it's all checked, and because we want them to not fossilize with the bad prosody. So this is typically the flow that I take with imitate, mark, check, say with a partner, mark, check, say with a partner, and then check, open class. And I give them the answers. And if they disagree with me, that's fine. We'll look at it. So it can be very, very student-centered and really brief task-based dialogues. There's an example of worksheets that I found at that website. And so sometimes when you don't want to make your own dialogues, these worksheets come with people reading them, which is brilliant. So you can copy it's a built-in, very, very nice class activity where you have the transcript, there's two people talking, the students mark it, and then you talk about it. But there's a right and a wrong answer, which is brilliant. Your students want the right and the wrong answer. They want to know if they're correct or not. And it's a speech act that is recorded and it's done. So there was falling intonation there. There was stress there. There was super stress there. There's no argument. And that's really helpful for your students. So there's an example there, and there's a lot on that website. So we're getting into the dirt of what I'm teaching, how I teach, the activities. So I'm teaching the marking of symbols with dialogues, and these are links to dialogues, and these are links to how I use in Google Docs. I have the students mark them up, and they can turn them in. And then I give them the links to the answers afterwards, so that either they can check on their own or we can check as a class. So I also have them record fixed dialogues. So they practice, and then they record, and then they transcribe, and then they mark them, and then they turn them in. And they can do dialogues and explain their choices with each other, or explain to you even just one sentence. So I put this mark because this is falling intonation. This is a thought group. As deeply or as shallowly as you need to go with this, you can. So again, 3 levels of practice with Morley. The level 1 is very, very imitative. It's listening, it's choral. I'm moving to pair practice with new sentences and dialogues and presentations. And then finally with level 3 with free discussion and debate and any non-scripted activity that you have. So that is everything. And I'm really, really sorry for the speed, but I wanted to give you as much as possible in one session. There's some final examples of activities that I do on Google using Google Slides, and basically the steps are here is the same as that I mentioned. So the level read and mark, compare with your group, discuss differences, and with level 1 using the same feature, but with the same paragraph or sentence for each feature, or dialogue for each feature, and then moving into new fresh dialogues for them to attack for level 2. This is as I mentioned before, I use elo.org, and this is an example of an activity that you can use to help build listening, where the students mark the script, and they listen and take notes, and all the steps are there, and there's a sample assignment that you can look when you have free time afterwards. I do a portfolio assignment, and the flow and the steps are there, recording cold, and then I teach the features, and then they record again, and we continue to work on the features, and then the final time they record, and then they compare their first and their third, and they do self-reflection about it. And I use a website called Zen Go, but a lot of it's paid for. My school pays for it, so that's fortunate for me. But if you don't have access to a paid site, you can use Google Drive to have the students upload things, and it works just fine. This is quite a long chunk of speech, and I could probably use a shorter one, but the students, they like the challenge. They said that they like the challenge of having such a long thing to practice, because it often mirrors their scripted speeches. So and that's about it. But so to end, really, you need to teach prosody. I'm just sold on this idea that teaching prosody is important because it's like teaching, if you don't, it's like teaching ballroom dancing, but the students have to stand still and there's no partner and there's no music. And that's it. So I will put this in the features, or sorry, in the artifacts of the on the Edzilla page, and I'll give you the PDF. I kind of want to put to take the risk and put it in the chat right now, but so that you would have a minute, but it will distract us and we don't have very much time. We only have about 10 minutes left. So I promise I will put it as a PDF in the artifact section. So do we have any, I know that was a lot and I'm really, really sorry for the lotness of it. But is there anything that anyone, comments, questions? You can write them in the chat if you don't want to say anything, which is fine. And if not, I will just do the PDF right now and I'll put it in and I'll let you go. And you can look at the, you can look at all the items and, hold on just a second. Let me make sure that it's closed because I need to do this on a different computer. Does anyone else teach pronunciation? Are you here because you teach it, or yeah, okay. Was any of this helpful? Oh, okay, informative.
It was very helpful.
Okay, oh, I'm so glad. People, my other colleagues have said that it's been helpful. It is a little bit all at once is a little bit overwhelming, I admit. But I really, really hope that you can get something out of this.
I have a question.
I do have a quick question, if that's okay.
Justin?
Yes.
James.
Okay.
My quick question is, did you modify this content any? You said you taught this at high school and university. So did you have to modify the content any for high school classes where you might have like maybe more limited technology or things like that?
In the high school classes, because I'm not teaching high school anymore, when I first started doing this, I was very much in the classroom. COVID was not a thing. And we did all of this on paper. So the modifications was that we just did it all on paper. And they turned things in on paper for homework because they had no IT at all. So, but that's a great question. It can be done either way. It's easier to do. I did give them, like, they could go home and do the listening at home, and then, but I had to copy the transcripts for them, that kind of thing. So now it's so nice. You don't have to stand at the copy machine. Just give them the links. Great question. Thank you. I am going to save this as a PDF. And
I have a quick question.
Okay, sure.
Have you tried to include poetry, because poetry has some rhythmic?
I have not. So I have used songs. Suzanne Vega has this great song called Tom's Diner that really, really fits really well with teaching, and it's similar to poetry. So you could very, very, very well use poetry, absolutely, depending on whatever you're teaching. Sometimes I use regular sentence first. I might use like a typical sentence first to teach the concepts and then move into poetry. Would probably be a good suggestion. Thank you. That's a brilliant question.
I have one, if I may. You were saying that native speakerness is not necessarily a goal, and comprehensibility and intelligibility are. Yeah. But even within people who speak English as a first language, there's quite a lot of variation in prosody. For example, in, let's say, Caribbean Englishes or African Englishes and so on, So when we consider like many second language speakers as well, I'm wondering about the models that you give. Are they all like first language speakers, like from Kaku's Inner Circle, that kind of basis, or what?
So that's a really good question. For my beginning learners, I have typically used, for my high school students, one reason I'm doing that, and it's kind of a sad reason, is that the high stakes listening tests that they have in Japan are all based on pretty much American English, or North American, sorry. For my university students, I use elo.org, has a lot of different, the author of the website brings in a lot of people from various different countries, and I typically use examples from all of those countries to help. Unfortunately, there are no Caribbean speakers so far on there, but it's been, the students find that it is difficult, and we talk about that. Well, why was it difficult? What was difficult? So thank you. That is a really, really important point to bring up, but elo.org will serve you quite well in that sense. And one of my things is trying to help my students boost their own intelligibility, which is probably the biggest thing. So rather than, I don't use it as, it's probably a 60-40 or a 70-30, that I focus on their own intelligibility, and then listening comprehension is kind of like a lucky thing that you get along with it. So, but being able to, yeah, obviously being able to understand someone else is vital. So thank you so much. That's a great question, Justin. Thank you. I am trying to save really quickly so that you have it. And I'll just put in, we have about 4 more minutes, and our handler, Garth, has given us a, thank you so much, has given us a link to go to the Discord server. And I will toggle over there in just a minute, just in case anyone has a couple of last minute questions. Before, we have like 3 minutes left, and I will try to get this into the, let me see if it, just a second, I'm struggling with IT, and I don't usually struggle, but I'm trying to focus on 2 things at once, and I want to get this done. So, oh, there it is. Okay. So I'm going to save this one more time as a PDF, and we're going to put it on the desktop so that I can find it. Okay. And we're saving it. The, one brief thing about the references is they're actually the references not only to this paper, but to this presentation, but to the paper that is going to come after it. So there's a lot more there than went into just the presentation, just saying. Okay, so that should, okay, we've got a PDF, and we have like 2 more minutes. And it hasn't shown up yet. Oh, there it is. Okay, good job. All right, I'm going to throw that into, there it is. So it was sent successfully in the chat. There is the PowerPoint with all of those links. There's a lot there. I didn't put my contact information, but if you really, really want to have a conversation about this, I can give you my email. So we're down to the last minute, and I'm going to toggle over to Discord, and I really want to thank you all for coming and for your questions. I appreciate your being here, making me feel not alone, and good luck with your prosodic features and your pronunciation endeavors. So thank you so much for joining. And
thank you very much, Julia. That was a very, very informative session, and definitely I think more people need to focus a bit on pronunciation. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Have a great day, guys. I hope to see you in the session.
Enjoy the rest of the conference all.
All right. Thank you so much.